to take into account that, for example, if you have a malefic in a certain house, there's going to be struggles with that too, right? Like I have Saturn in the second house, especially conjunct Neptune. Someone with Saturn in the second house in Capricorn is generally going to be pretty responsible with money. You add Neptune in there, it gets very, very complicated. But in general, if you have Saturn in the second house in Capricorn, you probably are going to have some kind of restrictions around making money, at least at the beginning, right? Because Saturn tends to get better with age. We need to learn responsibility in that area of life, yada, yada, yada. So that's why it is, in general, an overgeneralization to say, oh, if you have a planet here, that's a priority. Although, even when you have a malefic somewhere, that does tend to become a priority as well. So again, I'm not saying that this person that made this video, that empty houses are not priorities in our lives, is wrong. I think it's a good point. I think it's something to consider, but I think it's much more complicated. Another example is I have an empty ninth house, and yet I have spent so much time in academia. I'm now traveling internationally and planning to live internationally. It's something actually that I always wanted to do. But I have the ruler of the ninth, my sun, conjunct Neptune in Taurus. So when we look at it that way, it actually makes a lot of sense. So rather than my ninth house being empty, and that means the ninth house topics, things like international travel and higher education, not being a big part of my life, they've actually been like one of the biggest parts of my life. But those planets are also in my sixth house, and that's the house of day-to-day routine. So it makes sense that ninth house topics have become part of my day-to-day routine. So again, it's very complicated, and it depends so much on your personal chart. Another example is my sixth house, having the Sun and Venus there. In theory, I should be someone who is good at having a routine, and yet I'm not. We can look at that and say, well, a lot of that has to probably do with Venus. This is gonna manifest differently for different people. That's also something that's so important to take into account. So Venus likes ease. It's kind of lazy, as a stereotype. So from that perspective, it makes some sense that I might be bad at having a routine, even though somebody else with those placements might be good at having a routine. But we also need to look at the aspects that planet is making. My Venus is making aspects to malefics. That makes it difficult for Venus to function.